stories.
I'm female, and when I was 16, I hung out mostly with a small group of friends. Toby was gay, John was a small guy who pretended to be macho, and a foreign exchange student from Spain named Maria. At the time, both John and I had a bit of a crush on Maria, since she was bisexual, so we both attempted to impress her anytime an opportunity arose. One night in October, we were all hanging out at Toby's, smoking weed, like the fly little shits we were, and Maria said that she wished we would do something scary since Halloween was close, and it was her first in the States. Me, being the absolute pussy that I am, loved the idea of doing scary things like ghost hunts and shit, but actually doing them freaked me out. But wanting to impress her with my bravery, or stupidity, however you look at it, I suggested we go to this place called Spider Gates. It's an old cemetery in Leicester, Massachusetts. It is a little bit of a hike into the woods and super old, but it was supposed to be super haunted, so we drove the half hour and my dad's beat up Pathfinder to the middle of nowhere until we came to the path that led deep into the woods where the cemetery was. I parked across the street. The car didn't really lock because it was so old and beat up, so we just left it and took the keys. We smoked a bowl or two on our way to the cemetery. Once we got there, we were stoned out of our minds, so we walked around the cemetery for a little while, and nothing significant really happened. We heard some rustling and shit, which was probably just animals and the wind blowing through the trees. It made some eerie howling noises, but it was nothing out of the ordinary. We go to the part of the cemetery where the ground is raised a bit, like you were standing on a stage, and there are trees surrounding it basically in a circle, and we smoke another bowl. We were there for probably about 20 minutes just talking and smoking and laughing about stupid shit when we heard loud, heavy crunches through leaves and twigs coming from deeper into the woods from the opposite direction that we had come. It didn't sound like an animal. We all quieted down and looked, but it had stopped. We just ignored it and went back to smoking. John and I flirted pathetically with Maria, while Toby flirted with John, and it was a pretty good night. Maria stops and tells us to look into the woods. Right where she was pointing, probably like 50 to 100 yards away, there was a light. It looked like somebody was just holding a flashlight pointed towards us, but they were so far away that the beam didn't reach us. A few seconds later, it went out and we could hear this really weird, high-pitched, hyena-like laughing. What the fuck was that? We were miles from houses. Before anybody really said anything, another light flashed on, this time a bit closer. We began to hear running through the woods from the direction of the first light when the second went out, with the same creepy-ass laughter. We all got the hell out of there. It was really dark. I think the clouds were really heavy in the front of the moon, so seeing anything besides what our cell phones illuminated in the night was pretty much impossible. When we got far enough away and we felt safe, we started to calm down a bit and talk about what the fuck had just happened. But after only a few seconds of calm, the heavy footsteps started up behind us in the leaves. We stopped and turned. Right behind us, only barely visible, was the outline of something in the middle of the path. I probably would have shit all over myself if I wasn't so goddamn high. John, being the brave, macho guy, stepped out and yelled at whatever it was to leave us the fuck alone. A light switched on, I'm assuming in the person's hand, and they didn't move. They just stood there holding the light. This time, they were close enough, for the beam to fall onto us, though. John yelled at the person for probably another few seconds or so before they turned off the light, and we could see him walking away, all while we heard the same crazy laughing from far into the woods. We quickly got the fuck out of there and went back to the car. We got in and ready to drive as far away as we could, but when I turned the key, nothing. Not even the slow turning over, nothing. John liked to think he knew about cars, so we all got out and looked under the hood. The two cables that connect to the battery were hanging free. The screws that attached them around the posts or terminals, or whatever you call them, were missing. He didn't know if we could reconnect them without the screws, and honestly, I still don't. So we decided to try to call for help. No cell service. So what the fuck do we do now? We are in the middle of the woods with a dead car and no way to contact anybody. And we are sure those creeps weren't far behind because we could hear them like fucking hyenas playing manhunt in the forest. Luckily, a minute or so after that, a car came down the road and, seeing our hood up, pulled up to the side of the road to see if we needed help. I was really happy to see that it was two older women and not some laughing freak. We gladly accepted a ride from them to the nearest place with cell service and called my parents to pick us up. My parents were really pissed off with us for going to the cemetery in the first place, since it is technically trespassing, and for leaving the car there, but overall, they were glad we were fine after getting in the car with strangers, however nice and innocent they were. The next day, my dad, Toby, and I went back to get the car. Weirdly, we both had cell service, not sure what the fuck was going on there. I'm just glad that those two old women came by and offered a ride that they did. I'm not exactly sure if they were just having some twisted version of fun or if they were out to actually do harm, but I'm glad we didn't have the chance to find out. So, laughing hyena clowns in the woods, let's never fucking meet again. For those of you not familiar, Ocean City, Maryland is on the eastern coast and has a large connection of streets running along a lengthy boardwalk oceanside with attractions and food and stores along the way. I've been spending summers there my whole life up until the present date. I cannot give you an exact year except to say I was very young and between the ages of 5 or 9. So between the years of 1985 to 1989 is as accurate as I can narrow this down. Along the boardwalk at the time, they had an old school dunking booth. Ocean City and its boardwalk has changed attractions and stores and restaurants through the years, so this booth is no longer there. It used to function through the 80s, and I think it stopped around the 90s. They had this guy dressed as a clown that sat within the booth. Half-ass white makeup sometimes with a red nose. If I recall correctly, the guy was sometimes smoking a cigar, his paint and cigar wet from previous dunks in the water, and if business was slow, or even if it wasn't, he'd yell insults at folks walking by, trying to get them mad enough to toss the balls and try and hit the bullseye to dunk him. He would say some really mean shit, like to middle-aged men and women walking through. Hey, fatty, you feeling lucky tonight, tough guy? And what about that beluga bitch with you? Hey, you lip-dick motherfucker. Why don't you and your fat bitch come over here? I'll show her what a real man can fucking do. and things of this nature, worse or vulgar. In fact, some years later, my mom said that he had to get security to escort him to his car for his safety. One summer evening, we were strolling down the beach, and he's calling out his insults, trying to get someone to pay to dunk him. I kind of made eye contact with him as I was eating an ice cream cone. I noticed he was not wearing his nose. In fact, it was floating near him in the dunk tank. He looked directly at me and started licking the transparent dunk tank wall. And he shouts to my mom and stepdad, "Hey, Mom and Dad, she looks like a tasty little snack," and licks the glass again. My stepdad, without even thinking, flicks him off, and we scooted on by. He still made eye contact with me as my mom dragged me along, and I literally lost the top of my ice cream on the boardwalk, with him still licking the glass. Then the crowd filled in, and I never saw him there again. Thank goodness, creepy, insulting Ocean City clown. Let's not meet ever again. So, I was a college student back in 2009, 2010, I can't remember the exact year. Anyway, I was introduced to a friend of an acquaintance while in the cafeteria one day. The guy was skinny, dark-skinned, wore glasses, and kinda looked like a nerd in a pretentious, rich gangster kinda way. He usually wore button-down, short-sleeved shirts tucked into his pants with a belt. You'd probably have to meet him to get the image. The first thing he does after introducing himself to me and chatting a bit about random things, such as our goals for the future, if I remember right, is try to inundate me with all kinds of information about the Jewish Torah and how all religion is basically fake. He told me all about how the Bible and other religious books were bastardizations of this and how the definitions changed the meaning of everything, mostly about the different names for God or the Lord and how it pertained to different entities. I found him interesting, but at the time I was in an atheistic phase and wasn't all that interested, but it rubbed me wrong for some reason I couldn't explain, almost like cognitive dissonance. Also, I forgot to mention that the very first thing he did was introduce himself under a false name from a nation, Judea, or something very similar. We exchanged numbers and talked. One of the first things I noticed about this guy was how controlling and kind of manipulative he was. He would say things like, "If you want to be friends, you've got to be this sort of way," or "You can't eat certain foods because our way of life forbids it." He really wanted me on board with his religious thing for some reason. He would offer advice and help about things too, like romantic problems. He would end up being the first person I ever truly got drunk with, which was ironically a fun time. One of the things I learned very early on about this guy was that when he wasn't harping on about religious rules and stuff like that, that he was one of the funniest people I ever knew. He knew how to party, how to socially connect to people, and some conversations we had were very interesting, so we became the kind of friends that talk on the phone often. But one of the other things I noticed about him was he had this very creepy Jim Jones, Charles Manson kind of ability to make people listen to him and believe the things he told them. It was also very unsettling. I was well aware of his propensity towards manipulation quite early on, but for some reason I felt obligated to hang out with him until, of course, it became a sort of friendship. My strangest friendship ever. Another creepy thing about him is that He would show up when I'd least expect or want him to. I would turn my head and he'd be there. I was always super careful not to talk about him very loudly because he would do this quite often. Once when I was walking with my mom and really did not want to introduce them, but had to anyway. By then I already knew he was a psychopath and a narcissist. He had no empathy for anyone at all and would stroke his own ego all day long. He was incredibly vain too and took all kinds of useless supplements for no real apparent reason. When we were on the phone, he would tell me things about how the different names for God aforementioned were actually about aliens. He said humans were designed to mine gold because it would make the aliens immortal. The story he would try to sell me on would change many things over the course of our friendship, depending on what he was into. It would go from Jewish to Jamaican, then to Egyptian, then to something else I can't remember. Sometimes it would have elements of spirituality in it, and other times he would say that after we died, that's it. He'd talk about how beings lived in the sun and under the moon, and how light was fake and only dark light existed. Then he'd talk about how I should put together all of my college loan money with his, so he could buy a house near the beach and we would live it up down there, like I'd fall for that. Anyway, we meet these girls, and he wanted to show me how easy college girls are, so he starts chatting up this girl and her friend who happens to be lesbian. Their relationship is short-lived, and it's mostly because she said he had a temper and was too controlling. She's the one who told me his real name because she saw his ID card. So this guy gets the idea that he wants to kill her and her friend for humiliating him. Apparently the ex-friend mocked him or something. He said, "We don't let people do things like that to us and get away with it." So he started shopping around for poisons, a gun, and a knife, anything to try to get his revenge. He talked other people into helping him get these things too. So I see that this is getting out of hand, and the girl is a very nice girl, so I do the only thing I can do and tell security, but I tell them to keep me anonymous because this guy is fucking crazy and has said many things about wanting to be a gangster and wanting to kill people. Well, those fucking idiot security guards fucked that up, and he ends up finding out about it. I find out from a mutual friend at some point that this guy wanted to kill me. He plans to do so, but it seemed like some people either didn't come through for him or those friends weren't that into the idea. Anyway, we sort of pseudo-bury the hatchet, although he did tell me many times that he could kill me himself, but he wouldn't do that because I'm one of his one and only true friends. I don't doubt that he would try to do it. I told him I was manipulated into telling on him. Long story. As you can tell, the story needed to be any longer, and I'm trying to just give highlights and context. The things he said kept getting crazier and crazier, and if you tried to disagree with him, he would just get argumentative with tons of false facts or continue on. Some people actually bought this shit and were kind of like disciples to him, but I just couldn't get behind blatant lies that a sociopath made up. At a later point, we decided to go to a beach town to hang out and get drunk and have some fun. Yes, I was tempting fate, but back then I didn't care so much about my life, and I really needed to get out and break free from being a shut-in that never did anything. So me, him, two other friends went to this awesome college beach party town. It's only important to mention this because one of the friends he invited along was a guy with social issues that he didn't actually know. The guy just had money, and the other guy had a car. he used these guys as a means to an end. They weren't his friends. To my surprise, at one point the guy with the car strands us in the middle of the night when the whole town goes dead. Our cell phones died, and a drug dealer was the only hope for a ride we could get. So the dealer requests we hold something for him in exchange for a ride while he goes to get his granny's car. Charles makes me put it in my pocket after a bit. Looking back, the guy was doing everything he could to make me look more suspicious. He had me wait in an alley. I can't remember why exactly. He said it was out of sight, but the dealer came back and said that what he was doing was fucked up and that I stuck out over there in that sort of shadowy area. Looking back, if a cop would have drove by, they would have detained me on the spot, then taken the drugs off of my person and arrested me. Eventually, we leave and Charles decides that we should just keep the stuff the dealer handed him because he never came back anyway. So we were waiting by the gas station, and this guy literally goes up to a fucking police officer to ask for a ride. By this time, he had taken the stuff back and forced the other guy to hold on to it, but he had assumed that the socially awkward guy gave it back to me by then. I am sure that he was trying to get me in trouble at that point. Anyway, after we made it back, things went back to how they usually go. If I haven't mentioned it, Charles was a womanizer. He didn't care who it was. He'd go for her. He'd get with a woman that he thought would be impossible for anyone at all to get with, like married teachers and devout churchgoers who were in committed relationships, but he also didn't seem to have standards. He just liked to ruin people's relationships and their lives. It kind of shattered my illusions of people at the time because it showed me that everyone could be manipulated into doing things and that identity and personality didn't mean anything. I'm not sure, but I might have been depressed for a long time after that. Anyway, there was this girl who was a pastor's daughter, sort of pretty. She kept to herself mostly. Charles decided to go out with her at some point, and she entered this rebellious phase where she was sleeping around with everyone. She also didn't bathe or take care of herself. Apparently Charles was her first. When I asked her if that was true, she proceeded to tell me horror stories about how he was manipulative and abusive towards her, and one time, during a fight while they were walking back to campus, he tried to push her into traffic. This was told to me during a period of time he had left and gone somewhere for an internship. Thankfully, I thought, because I wasn't likely to see him again, at least not for a long time. I was wrong. He came back when I least expected it, and he was just as fucked up as ever. I told him I thought a girl liked me once and expressed a desire to get with her, just random conversation that I didn't think would go anywhere. I just needed to work up the nerve and do it. Upon hearing this, he goes over to her. They talk. Next thing I know, they are in a relationship. This relationship lasts a few weeks, and for some reason, he's told her and everyone else that I'm his cousin. Suddenly they break up, and she's avoiding both him and me. I try to explain that I'm not like him, and that she doesn't need to be afraid of me, but she absolutely refuses to be around me. If I sit at the table that all of our friends are at, except Charles, she gets up and leaves. Someone asks her about it, and she told them that it was because Charles was my cousin, and that he did horrible things to her when they were together. This scumbag did that stuff just because I liked her, and in a way, it was my fault. Anyway, a few years later, 2012 or something, I have a new circle of friends. A guy named Ricky, another named Mike, and a girl named Karen. Ricky had a huge crush on Karen, but we all got along with just fine. One day, Charles just shows up and tries to get Ricky to join us in our adventures, or what the fuck ever. I'm really just trying to find any excuse to distance myself at this point, but I guess at this junction in my life, I'm still way too shy to tell people off, or not to be afraid to speak up. Anyway, this idiot has some plan to form our own gang or something, and one day he's trying to three-way call us. I badly wanted to tell Ricky that giving him his number was a terrible idea, but I didn't want to get shot or stabbed or anything. I didn't pick up the phone, and apparently they had a conversation. Later on, I found out that during their few weeks of friendship, Charles was trying to get Ricky into a plan to lure me into some trap and kill me. He had sold Ricky a lie originally that I liked Karen and Ricky didn't seem to mind, and said that he would step down, so Charles started spinning other lies. Ricky didn't go for any of it in the end, and we talked and had a long, healthy conversation about it. Ricky is still a good friend to this day. Eventually, Charles left, and the last I heard from him was some voicemail from 2015 or something. Hands down the creepiest person I've ever met, befriended, made an enemy of, and then had to play it cool with for years on, and just not to get killed or worse. He never did admit his real name to me. He always introduced himself under false names to strangers too. Charles, let's not ever fucking meet again. If you're new, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe to my channel, as it really helps me out. And if you are already subscribed, welcome back and thank you for subscribing.